500 years ago, he washed ashore the sole survivor of a shipwreck. And upon the skull of the man who killed his dad, he said, "I'm mad, I must eradicate piracy, injustice and cruelty, and all my sons will follow me, so evildoers will believe that this man cannot die."
G'day, this is Expand the Phantom podcast. Our website is chroniclechamber.com, and you can subscribe to our podcast via YouTube or through your favourite podcast apps. Do not forget to give us a rating on your podcast app and or tell a mate about us. I am Jermayn, and today I am joined by Duncan, who will be helping me try and contain our special guest. How are you, Duncan?
As you were, gentlemen. I'm fine, Jermayn, and I'm looking forward to meeting our guest today.
I'm sure I'm going to have people asking about this loud shirt, so we'll get this out of the way now. I did have a friend of the podcast who recently purchased this shirt and said that he wants to see it on a podcast. So he's given it to me for a weekend to borrow for this podcast. So that's the story behind this horribly loud T-shirt. Now, let's get on to more important matters like our special guest. Now, our special guest, he may well be our most educated and most professional guest we have ever had. I made the mistake of looking at his LinkedIn profile for this podcast, and I felt like a failure reading it. What about you, Duncan? Do you get nervous reading his profile?
I'm always nervous when the doctor tells me to turn my head, but I'm sure I'm not going to look away today.
Awesome. So, telling a little bit about our special guest, he is a practicing doctor with over 30 years' experience, combined with ongoing service through several significant federal and state medical policy roles, providing outcomes to improve the well-being of Australians. He was also the chairperson of the International Health Assessment Panel under Medevac Legislation in 2019, assessing claims of refugees from Manus Island and Nauru. Now, all that is very, very impressive, but perhaps his most important role is to be the comedy relief for the LFMBEC dinners. Now, we will discuss a lot about the dinners later, but first, let us introduce Antonio and learn more about him. Welcome, Antonio. How are you?
Oh, g'day, Jermayn. It's lovely to be here. I'm very, very well, and I'm very embarrassed by such a kind introduction. Generally speaking, I find myself, whenever I'm in a room, not to be the dumbest person in the room at first, but give me 20 minutes and I'll get there.
No worries. You're amongst good company then. Awesome. So I guess let's start from the beginning. Obviously, we know you from the dinners, but like I said, we'll discuss a little bit about that. We want to learn a little bit about yourself, Antonio. So how did you become a Phantom fan?
I was thinking about this the other day. Basically, a lot of Phantom fans my age became fans before they could actually read, and that was definitely my experience. My mum used to wash clothes in the old-fashioned copper. So, you'd put things in one end and then you'd turn them around, and it was exactly the same mechanism by which we used to make pasta. You'd turn sheets of flour and dough around. But as she was doing that, underneath she'd put old newspapers. And the old newspapers often had these gigantic Sunday strips. In those days, it would have been Siberian, 1968, 69, 70. And it just captured my imagination, and it was so beautiful. And that was years before I could read. And I guess that gave me a love of sequential panel art and comics, particularly those beautiful big colour comics. And the bug has never departed. I just bought something today that was shiny and pretty in an op shop because it had characters in tight costumes wearing primary colours.
Fair enough. So what with the sequential art and the men running around in tights, what is it about the Phantom in particular that you like that has drawn you in and that continues to draw you in even today?
Absolutely. So I guess it was the first thing that I was passionate about when I was 3, rapidly followed by footy and a whole bunch of other things that I guess normal Aussie kids are interested in. And then I got into Disney, ducks and mice, and as you do. And then, like a lot of people, you then get into superheroes. And then when you get a lot older, you go back to ducks and mice, which I have. And you also keep that phantom love all the way through. The peculiar thing about us, I think, was that growing up in country towns in Australia, but also had a big chunk of my childhood in a very poor village in Sicily. The phantom had a presence there as well, but it was very different. It was a lot of the stories were drawn by Fellmang or inferior artists to him, or they were reprints of Falk and Barry. And so he was always there. And when I came back, again, Australia didn't have comic book stores in the 1970s and 80s, well, certainly not until about 83, and certainly not in little towns where I grew up. So you'd get sometimes you'd get comic books in the local news agency, but the only one that was really consistent was every 2 weeks or so there would be a new issue by Frew. And so through sheer reliability, and also there was a Sunday page. I never got the daily newspapers, but the Sunday papers we did. So through sheer reliability and just being there all the time, the Phantom eventually became somewhat indispensable and a big part of my life. Also, when you'd go to school, people would talk about it a lot and people's parents would talk about it. It was sort of part of the vernacular. So I guess for me, the Phantom was a lot like I was to my wife. I wasn't necessarily appealing or exciting, but I was just there all the time and became a habit. Duncan.
Antonio, that's a great answer. And I've been listening to this podcast for a long time, and you're one of the first people who's made reference to the Phantom being part of the zeitgeist in that schoolyard context. Some have mentioned it briefly before, but I'm interested in seeing what that the memory of that feels like, because by the time I was going to school, it was a very small group that did that, down to Sammy J and I. And now it's practically non-existent. And you probably were seeing that with the amount of families that you treat in your practice. What was that like back then? Like, what do you think was behind that popularity back then? The kids at school were talking about footy, cricket, and the Phantom.
Look, I think when you're a kid, the things that are most important are the things that are in front of you. And so the only music that mattered was what was on Countdown that weekend, or what your siblings or friends listened to. And the only books that mattered are what people gave you to read at school. And the only comics that mattered were the ones that were passed around by friends. And so it was reasonably fortunate for us that the Phantom played that role. I didn't have a lot of mates who read comics, probably only about 3 or 4. And reading comics was not cool by any means. And boy, oh boy, did that continue through to my 20s. In fact, I was that guy in 1988, 1989 that took a girlfriend to a comic shop. And thank you, Neil Gaiman. Thank you, because the Sandman was there and it wasn't too bad. But I think you'll all remember Tripod's song, Girl in a Comic Shop, and that was me.
That's an excellent answer. That's really well said.
You made mention about growing up in Sicily or Italy, for those who don't know the geography. Obviously, there was the Sparta comics, which were released, which were quite large in France and in Italy, those regions as well. What was it like reading those? Because, I've got a whole pile of them, and I love them, and I enjoy the art. But I've never actually talked to anyone who's grew up on a staple of those comics as well. So I mean, it's not on my run sheet at all. But like, I'm intrigued to kind of learn what that was like reading those stories.
Yeah, for sure. Look, the answer is like so much in your childhood, especially when you're 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. It was utterly confusing because there was no context. My parents had no idea. Neither did I. You just see these things there and think, my goodness, where did that come from, and what's it all about? And I'd seen before I left Australia the last time when I was about 9 in about 1975. I really loved Planet Comics, which were black and white reprints of DC books, and the very occasional Marvel reprints, which were done by Newton Comics and were marvellous. And so I had read a fair bit of them, and the Frew issues I probably read every second or third one, whatever appeared in the paper shop in my hometown. Then we went over to Italy for the last time for a couple of years until I was about 11, and as you said, there were comics everywhere. Italy loved comic books, and it was a lot like Japan, where they were created specifically for commuters, which is weird. Totally fine in Milan and Turin and Rome, where people actually had jobs. But if you've looked at your stats today, the unemployment rate in Sicily is 61%, and it wasn't that much different when I was a kid. And so there weren't a lot of commuters, but the comics did filter down, and the 70s was a huge era in Italy for splatter movies, semi-pornographic and pornographic comic books, and the same size and shape comic books of innocent, sweet childhood stuff. So it was utterly weird, and they were all sold side by side next to each other, completely hit and miss, at the corner shop. And there was a corner shop literally on every corner. It really was amazing. And it went together with, and this is an indulgence, I'm afraid, it went together with Panini stickers. So you'd buy your album at the start of the year of whoever was playing the Champions League or Euro, and you'd have to get your Panini stickers. And they had them for every big movie that came out as well. And it cost 25 lira for a packet, which was 2.5 cents. And you would think that's pretty cheap, but I didn't have enough to get the ones for the soccer team and the ones for the Star Wars movie. And I chose poorly. Everybody said that Star Wars would never catch on, it was rubbish, flash in the pan. And Duncan, I've followed that philosophy with all of my investment decisions for the 45 years since then.
It still could just be extended flash, you know.
So you made mention of the Panini stickers. There has been King Features versions of those with Phantom ones and stuff like that as well.
I did not know that.
Which are highly collectible at the moment. You've probably had a lot larger influence than a lot of the Australian readers in the sense that you were introduced to creators like Cineo Prezzi, Felmain, Ferry, and some of these other Italian masters before a lot of Australians have. Like most Australians have probably only been introduced to those in the last, dozen or so years, especially with the Frew's Phantom's World. So that's pretty exciting. So do you have any favourite Phantom artists or writers that kind of are any of them, or are you more old school when it comes to Lee Falk and Cy Barry?
Great question. So, of course, I'm incapable of answering that succinctly or appropriately. But can I tell you what it reminds me of so much, Jermayn, is guys who collect Donald Duck and particularly Uncle Scrooge will tell you that in the 1940s, 50s and 60s, Dell and Gold Key never credited the artists. They never said who drew these issues. And so for 20, 30 years, there were the artists and there was the good artist. of course, the good artist was Karl Barks. And it wasn't until the early 70s that people actually found out who he was. It's amazing, amazing artist, writer, editor, storyboarder, you name it. And so the same very much applied to me reading Phantom comics and reading any comics. I had no idea that the person who wrote those Batmans and Green Lanterns that I was so crazy about was Neil Adams. It was the same person every time, and yet, the person who replaced Gil Kane wasn't too bad, but this was just a different level. So I did have my favourites, and if you had to pin me down and name one person, I think Wilson McCoy is the guy that I have loved since I was a child. There is no doubt in the world that Cy Barry is a superior artist by a long shot. He's a magnificent artist. But McCoy just, he's such a pleasure to read. He's actually a really good storyteller. I used to have a lot of fun reading page after page, maybe 3 or 4 pages in a row without looking at what was written in the word balloons, just to see if I could tell what was happening, and never a problem. I'd love to have seen Carmine Infantino have a longer run. As you know, we had Ray Moore, and then what was that, 36 to 47 or something, and then with a bit of a break for the war, and then Wilson McCoy, and then Cy in 1961, who was unbelievably brilliant until approximately 94, I think. But there was a few weeks there where Carmine Infantino did it, and he and Cy Barry and Dan Barry were all at DC, and Dan Barry was a master. I don't know what kind of person he was, but he was certainly an amazing artist. And then all of the ones since then doing the Sunday and daily strips have been technically excellent, and I think they've all been shafted terribly because they've all been denied the opportunity to have great big half-page strips where you could actually give them a chance to show what they can do. And so they've all been brilliant, I think, in the last 20, 30 years at telling a story with very little opportunity. But just for the sheer beauty of it and the joy and the happiness, Wilson McCoy makes me happy. Looking at comic books from elsewhere, crazy different stuff I love. Love Bill Lignante. Part of the reason I love Bill Lignante is because Richard loved him, and so it made him happy and it made me happy. When the Aussies took it over in the 80s for that brief period of time, I got really excited. That was so lovely. When Dave Gibbons drew a couple of issues, that was amazing. I love all of the Italians. I love Felmang's confidence. Felmang has drawn a whole lot of different stuff, and he brings all of those sensibilities to the Phantom, and I don't think he gives a damn about censorship or anything else. Luke McDonald was great. He was very, very technically correct. Lou, tell me Lou's surname. Lou Manor.
Manor,
yep.
He brought an extraordinary 90s sort of power to it. And you've got to give Lou Manor a lot of credit because a lot of guys who were drawing comics in the 90s did a dreadful job, going overboard on the steroids and the hyper sort of realism, whereas Manor was able to rein that in and still tell a very powerful story. I feel embarrassed at all the wonderful artists I've left out. I'm sure that there's so many that I love, but there's been more good Phantom artists, I think, than bad ones. We've been blessed from that point of view, and all of those wonderful Swedish books. There's very few of those that have someone doing a technically excellent job.
You've spoken like a true politician, managing to get everyone in, getting everyone in, including everyone. So, no, I appreciate that. So what about a favourite?
Oh, sorry, I left one out. The bloke who's doing, Aussie guy who's doing the Frew covers, not all of them, obviously. Glenn Lumsden.
Glenn Lumsden, yeah.
He's channeling the best of Brian Bolland and has for the last few years, and it's just magnificent. Particularly those giant-sized phantoms that come out. It's got wonderful Shane Foley art in each issue. It's got great reprints, but even if you don't open the book, those Lumsden covers are something else.
Bolland is a great comparison for Glenn's work. Well said.
What you reckon? I mean, it just looks like the cover of The Killing Joke.
Mm.
So do you have like a favourite Phantom story? Or
Yeah, for sure. Don't we all? My favourite is The Childhood of the Phantom, which I read as a kid, and then I could never find it again, ever. And then Jim put it into issue 1063, which was an annual, and I rang him up and said, "I've got to come over," and he said, "You're an idiot." But I came over anyway to Castlereagh Street and gave him a hug. Which, of course, Jim being Jim, uptight, straight-laced Australian man, not welcome. But I was so excited to read that. It was really special.
So, Antonio, has the Phantom ever found its way into your professional life? So, have you adopted a purple stethoscope, Ghost Who Walks tongue depressors, or have you had Phantom comics in your waiting room at some time in your practice in the past? How does the Phantom leave his stamp on Dr. DiDio?
Well, for the last 25 years, there's been a beautiful print, couple of prints on my wall, which illustrate both the Phantom and my own character. In that, I think Pete Klaus, on his first trip to Australia, brought a couple of illustrated, a nice Phantom Sundays from the 1950s, which had been autographed by Lee Falk. And I thought, wow, just once in my life I've got to have that. So I bought them, and because I'm really, really clever, I got them photocopied and framed the photocopies and hid the originals. Okay. And then within almost about 30 seconds, lost the original.
Can't find them.
Don't know where they are. But those beautiful Wilson McCoy's been hanging on my wall for a long time. And look, there's the occasional Phantom tie, and there is a purple stethoscope. But aside from that, pretty well disciplined. I don't need any help convincing my patients that I'm a deeply eccentric man.
I'm sure that's reassuring. When you say it's also part of your personality, is the image personally significant to you that's up in the office? Which one is it?
No, it's the complete ineptitude of losing the originals that is reflects who I am. And
what came first for Antonio? Reading the Phantom or an inclination to help people and heal the sick?
Both at the same time. I was, like a lot of migrant kids, it was quite, I thought it was pretty hard. Looking back on it, I was so lucky. I was actually unbelievably privileged. The luckiest human beings in the world are people who've got not one but, more parents. I had lots of parents, but at least two at any given time. And they were beautiful, and they loved me dearly, and wanted me to be happy. So to me, that is privilege. But at the time, I thought we were very poor, and life was very difficult, and I couldn't speak English, and I was really crap, and I was very lonely. And so, and I was an only child in Australia. Back in Italy, there was a million of us. So, you convince yourself that you're Clark Kent and that you've been rocketed to Smallville, and that, you don't belong, and that you hope to God that your superpowers are going to kick in at some point. So you, but you also get given an incredible motivation. So again, I thought my life was so difficult. My life was so easy in that you go to school, you pass a bunch of tests, you catch the train, which is at the end of your street, go to Sydney, go to university, become a doctor. Like it was awesome. thank you, Australia. How good is Australia, really? We were so fortunate. And by the way, uni was free, except for the last couple of years when the HECS came in. But even that was wonderful. So I always wanted to do medicine. I think a lot of migrant kids have a similar experience. And in fact, when I went to uni, about 220 or so kids in my year were Skippy the Bush Kangaroo Aussie kids who'd had a very, particular journey, and about 30 of us were Italians and Greeks and Vietnamese who had very similar stories and whose parents were very keen on us to do well. My favourite migrant joke is, and you can insert whatever country you want to. It's how do you know somebody from such and such a country has burgled your house? And it's the floors have been vacuumed and the kids' homework's been done. And I love that. I love it shows that hybrid vigor of the migrant experience and the ambition and the desire for your kids not to have the same unemployment and poverty that you had. And my parents were very keen for me to do something that fit into their frame of reference. And of course, they didn't have a frame of reference that included a whole bunch of other stuff, like particular kinds of science or art or literature or music or all the stuff that they couldn't see. They could just see that the people in town who had reliable jobs were bank tellers, doctor, lawyer, the accountant. So you got to become one of them. So, you got a job. We were sold a bit of a pup with some of those jobs back in those days that technology changed. But so I had that inculcated, not with a lot of pressure, with a lot of love, but it was there. But what your parents can't help is whatever country they take you to try and build a better life, you're going to be 5 or 6 or 7 years old, and a switch in your head is going to be turned on by all the popular culture around you. And I've seen it happen with all of my children. It's actually lovely to see that moving on. It's really nice to see the things that you can't change. You just have to enjoy and hope that they're lovely human beings who are going to go with those things well.
Wow. Excellent story. And amazing, your origin and our evolution story, just like the Phantom stories that you've enjoyed reading. But you started in what sounds like quite challenging circumstances growing up, and through the nurturing your family and those opportunities, you're now in a position where you've achieved a tremendous amount of success. In that time, on the Phantom side, what's been the thing, whether you've still got it now or you've ever had it in the past, that had the most intrinsic value to you, your favourite Phantom thing that you had in your possession at whatever point it was?
A really good question. I think I can see it.
Go show us.
Oh dear, have I taken away the Zoom?
No, it's all right. You're still there. Do you want us?
Over there is a bunch of stuff, and behind the Marvel Superheroes number 12, which is the first Silver Age Captain Marvel, is a Phantom number 97, and I just love it because it's old and it's crappy, and because I loved what I was doing the day that I bought it. That means a lot. It's actually really interesting how it's not the first issue or the best issue or the most beautiful issue of a comic run that means something to you. It's the one that influenced you the most. So I've got just as an example, I've got every Captain America from Tales of Suspense number 59, and can't help it. But there's a pretty mediocre issue 271, March 1983. And that's the most special comic book I reckon I have, because I bought it at the paper shop down the street on the way home from school, and I had enough money from my part-time job that I could buy the next one. number 272. And eventually there were about 30,000 of them. But for a while there was just those two. And then the next month there was a third one. So it's what your first experience is that counts. I delight in a bunch of X-Men books, but it's a reprint of number 7 that is my most precious one, because it's the first one I read. And the love triangle of Cyclops and Angel and Jean Grey was in it, and Stan and Jack were just having fun. But I thought it was Shakespeare.
And that's another great answer, and a very emotional answer. And that goes on to my next question, which is, in your collecting Phantom Connection history, what's been your favourite memory associated with being part of that Phantom's world?
It's a collection of memories of all the people that I've met, including you two. I have met so many beautiful people and have so many lovely stories through the Phantom that I would never have otherwise experienced. I mean, the Phantom, my wife jokes about it all the time, and that, about 3 or 4 years ago, just at the front of the house here, there's a knock on the door, and the Prime Minister and his wife came in with their mothers. And the kids like, "What's going on?" And straight away, Kath said, "Oh, it's the Phantom." And it was, I go to the cricket and I meet my heroes. I spent a whole day at the cricket with Brian Lara, and I came home and I told my wife, and the kids were like, "My God, what happened there?" And Mum's and Kath's like, "It's the Phantom." I had an amazing couple of days when I used to live in Sydney on the set of filming one of the Star Wars movies. And one of the actors needed a doctor on the set but refused to have a doctor on the set. So they told him a porcupine, and they said that Mr. Lucas needed an assistant director to help with some colour filters. So I stood there with George Lucas for 2 days pretending that I knew something about the camera thing. But what I was actually doing was looking at that dude over there, and went home and told Kath, "This is unbelievable." And she quite liked the Star Wars and said, "That bloody Phantom again, isn't it?" I said, yes, because, and it's not because it's got nothing to do with being manipulative or cynical or leveraging human beings or using your contacts. In fact, I have a rule that if anybody asks you to do anything, you just say yes, just volunteer for everything, which is why I've done some pretty horrible jobs. But what that will show to other people is that is hopefully that you're a reasonable, rational person, and that you're interested in doing the right thing. But they will then call you and say, "Oh, that thing you did for me, can you do that thing for my friend?" And sometimes that friend turns out to be somebody amazingly interesting who loves the Phantom too, or who loves comic books as well. I had to see a politician, because Parliament House is about 200 metres that way, 500 metres. I'm doing a house call on the way home a couple of years ago, and said, "Wow, that's an interesting Tantan you've got there." And he just stopped talking and cancelled his meeting and said, "I've got to go." And he dragged me to his back room and showed me his comic collection.
Oh, wow.
And, there is an International Secret Society of Nerds and Losers, and it's my plan to bring these people out into the open.
well, we appreciate you taking time out of the meeting to talk to the fan club for that group. And that's an amazing philosophy to have. And for any of the listeners that don't know Antonio, it is absolutely sincere. That's exactly what it says on the box, and exactly what you get when you open the packet. But speaking of incredible people, regular listeners will be aware that the Leaf Falk Memorial Bengali Explorers Club events that are held each year. And a driving force behind them has been the revered and recognised founder of the dinners, the late but wonderful Richard Fryer. Can you please tell us about your friendship with Richard and how you met and how you formed that friendship?
Yes, I'd love to, and I'll try not to get Italian and weepy. So Richard was my patient at the surgery in Sydney when I was in 5-Doc in the 90s. And I can't remember what I saw him for. He was so robust and fit and healthy. But he was just beautiful. And he had a gorgeous boy who is now 33, I think, young Daniel. He would have been about 5 at the time. And a lovely wife, Bronnie, and a couple of stepkids who were beautiful. And I loved seeing Richard, A, because he was wonderful, but B, because it was the only time on any given day that I got to speak English, which was quite a nice novelty for me. All of my patients were little old Italians like my parents, and they were hilarious, or they're long-suffering children like me. So we became pretty good buddies and hung out a bit. And sometimes he'd come over at the end of he was a school teacher at the local school, and I was the local GP, and we'd go for a coffee or a beer after work sometimes, and it was really lovely. Anyway, 1999, Lee Falk passed away. We decided to go out to dinner to celebrate. We couldn't do it in time because we had things coming up. So during the course of that next week, a couple of other guys invited themselves, and about a dozen of us went out to dinner, including Jim Shepherd, who at the time was publishing Through. And Steve Panozzo, I recall, came along, and some other just lovely, lovely people. And at the end of the night, Jim got up to say a few words, which was beaut. It was really nice. And we passed the hat around it, and I just thought it'd be a nice gesture. And we sent the money to the kids' hospital. And then Richard, being Richard, said, let's do it again. And so we have, and that's how the dinner started. And in that first, and because it was so much fun having an artist there, and because it was so much fun having a speaker there and having a sort of focus, I guess, we did it a lot. We did it every 3 months for the first decade or so. No, that can't be right. Probably the first 5 or 6 years. And then it became annual as we got more tired. And as life got in the way. But it was great. And we piggybacked our event with Danny putting on Supernova so that people could come from elsewhere and combine the two. And Danny was so generous. I met Danny when he was stacking shelves at the local IGA in order to pursue his dream of creating either a comic book store or a comic book festival. And with the help of his parents and his cousins and his extended family, he did it, and he's still doing it. And I'm so impressed. But he would often share guests with us, which was amazing. And so we just got into this lovely groove of organising dinners and speakers, and whatever money we made, we'd send it to the hospital. Richard was full of enthusiasm and life, and drove his family insane with that passion and enthusiasm. And so we really got on. We had a very similar approach. He was just beaut. I was so privileged to give his eulogy last weekend in Sydney, and it was really nice because I was staying with my eldest son and his wife, and they lived basically a few hundred metres away from where Richard and Bronnie lived when I met him, which was super cool. And this beautiful 5-year-old Daniel's this middle guy in his 30s who's just this beautiful young man, and Richard's the people who turned up to his memorial service They were Richard all over. They were all just so diverse and eclectic and came from all walks of life, and just demonstrated not just what a lovely person he was, but also how incredibly diverse he was in what he loved. One of the things that he was most proud of was teaching Year 5 at the same school for 30 years or so. What I didn't know until the memorial, when I met his old school principal, was that there were several kids who left the school because they found out that they weren't going to have him as their teacher. So loved and respected was he. And he used to, every year for about the last 25 years, he'd go on a big holiday overseas, and no matter where he went, he would stay with somebody that he used to teach in primary school. And that is unbelievable. That's just what a person to either that or what a pain in the ass. But I think what a great person.
I think you're right.
Yeah. And in fact, last year or the year before, I think it was last year, he used to love going to the kids' hospital to hand over the cheque every year. Mm-hmm. And I after all these years, I did it for the very first time a couple of weeks ago, because it was it was a chore that he loved. And when he did it last year, two of the people who worked in the hospital who accepted his payment were women in their 50s who he had taught at school.
Really?
Just so beautiful.
And so this year's donation, when you went and presented that cheque, I think that was pushing over the limit of $100,000 raised for Westmead.
So just under 108,000, and that's without really trying.
It's amazing.
Part of the reason we've done so well is because just about every guest we've had, either I've driven them home late at night, or they've come from overseas and they've stayed for a week at Richard's house, and he's shown them around Sydney and given them a holiday and free accommodation. So our costs were always pretty low, and also that first few years. We had this really intelligent business model where we'd pay for the costs, and then we'd donate 100% of the proceeds rather than the profits. And that was beautiful, and we really enjoyed that too.
Can you tell us a little bit about the auction process, where the auctions came from? Because for a lot of fans, especially for those who have come in the recent 5-10 years, like myself and Duncan, that has become the highlight almost of the weekend, is the whole auction process.
Oh, that's so sweet. Thank you. So the way it started out was that we always wanted to have a bit of a theme. So we'd go to a restaurant, and depending on who the speaker was, the theme would be around the speaker. So Doc Neeson came to our third or fourth one, and so the theme was rock and roll. So everybody had to dress up in some kind of rock and roll thing, and Doc spoke about how much he loved the Phantom, and what a complete shocker Superman was. What a complete loser he was. And I took him home, he and his beautiful partner Annie, and they stayed in our spare room that night, in a room that was literally covered in Superman memorabilia and thousands of Superman comics. Now, this man-child in his cave.
I've heard a story that Doc Nelson came up with and sung a specific Phantom theme song for the evening. Is that correct?
Yeah, he did. It's. I've got a few leftover CDs of it over there. He wrote a song called "The Phantom Rap," and it was great. He really put a lot into it. And in fact, he brought a couple of guitarists with him, and the place just went off. We were in a tiny little restaurant in Surrey Hills. I think it sat about 50 people, and we filled it. Doc got up and played what he loved, which is Buddy Holly. So he did about 3 or 4 of his songs, and then he did a couple of his. And he did a magnificent version of "Am I Ever Going to See Your Face Again?" And all of these people from all walks of life, including a couple of American tourists screaming out, "No way, get F off," thinking, what, as did all the waiters and restaurant staff, not knowing what was going on. And then I remember at that particular dinner, David Mack and Brian Bendis came along, and Brian said, "Look, I'm going to create this character called Alias, and then I might take over the Avengers. And I've got some ideas for Daredevil," and then wrote the greatest Daredevil run of all time. So it was that was beautiful. And so, but whatever the guest was at the time, there's a beautiful guy called Dietmar Liederbosch who came to every dinner in those days, and he would always bring a print, and that would be our raffle for the night. And then I would usually bring a couple of dozen bottles of cheap grog, and we would make sure everybody won one as a prize. And then we'd get people to autograph Phantom memorabilia, whether it was relevant or not. So the local opposition leader came, who's a massive Phantom fan, really, really good person. All sorts of non-comics people did a lot of those things. And eventually we settled into a groove where we would just get a comics person, preferably someone who had drawn rather than written the Phantom, to come along so that they could then have an easel and draw a Phantom picture. And we'd always try and have about 3 or 4 drawings. And then people would just turn up and donate stuff on the night, and we'd do a silent auction, which we organised on the spot. But then it became, just more and more beautifully organised. Bradley and Joyful started coming about 18 years ago, and they were very skilled in printing, and so they came up, and still do come up, with these beautiful organised booklets. And so because of that, the silent auction items had to come in earlier and be more organised. And the auction became, it certainly didn't, it was never planned for it to be entertaining. The plan for the auction was for it to be an efficient way of getting the right amount of money for the 2 or 3 items that we got that were just quite special, because we found that if we didn't, then real treasures would go really cheap. And I have no objection to that at all, but I just wanted to go for a bargain, not really cheap, because that actually is almost insulting to the person who's donated it, and it's potentially very insulting to the artist who's actually drawn something. You think, oh my goodness, we don't want them to feel diminished or devalued by our lack of organisation.
And of course,
I guess the last decade, the auction's been big for that reason.
And of course, the funds are all for the Children's Hospital as well. So they want to get as much dollars out of everyone as possible.
Yeah, we had a really interesting afternoon at the Kids Hospital a couple of weeks ago, not the least of which was when we wanted to get a photo taken, and I turned to the bloke next to us and said, "Oi, can you take a photo of us?" And he came over, and it was Michael Hooper, the captain of the Wallabies. and I thought, who are those blokes in matching jackets? Oh, it's the rest of the Wallabies. Oh, great. But the person that we gave the funds to was actually incredibly reassuring and helpful to us. Back in the day, all 5 of the main Kids Hospital entities in Victoria and in New South Wales all had their own fundraising teams. And about 7 or 8 years ago, they outsourced it to a place called the Children's Hospital Foundation that does it on their behalf. And we were always a little bit cynical or a little bit worried that whatever funds we gave them would simply be removed from whatever the allocation they got was the next year from government. But it's not true at all. All of the funds we give them, every cent of it is actually incredibly pragmatically used. You see, and I've had a lot to do with our hospital here over the years. When you have a piece of equipment, it might have a depreciation life of 10 or 12 years. But after 5 or 6 years, it might not be very good, or it might be nowhere near cutting edge for what your patients actually need. So the donations will often go to updating stuff that government can't or won't update within its budget envelope. So the funds that they get from us are wonderfully useful to them.
It's fantastic to have that, I guess, that value add from you as a medical professional, explaining just how it's not just a figure on a check. It's actually something that it transitions into an actual thing. And that's really helpful for people who've donated in the past to know that.
Absolutely. I'm visiting and hanging out with one of my mates who's having some chemo at the moment, and I think will do very, very well. But a lot of the extra things that make that experience more tolerable are a consequence of the generosity of the community. They're not necessarily entirely provided, or can be entirely provided by the state. So most charity to health is very well utilised. I mean, obviously, there's costs involved in every way, but I've certainly never regretted pointing people towards charity.
And Antonio, many fans were moved by this year by your heartfelt words at the dinner in relation to Richard and his passing, and everyone associated with the dinner, past and on that occasion, is obviously saddened by Richard's passing. And the LFMBEC and the benefits from the fundraising conducted in its history are an incredible legacy to be carried forward. As someone who had such a close friendship with Richard, what would you desire for a way to see his memory carried forward at those events? An annual toast, an empty place setting to commemorate it, a memorial page on the website or on the program. What do you think would be fitting?
All of those things are excellent, Duncan, and all of those things have crossed my mind. Whatever it is, it needs to be along those lines, and it needs to honour him and also make his family welcome, which I think they would. They'd be not only feel welcomed, but they'd feel really proud. There's a really interesting interview I read with Frank Miller about his and Klaus Janssen's run on Daredevil, and then almost straight after James DeMatteis's run on Justice League in the 80s, where they both said, looking back on it, it's fantastic and it's wonderful that it's become a touchstone. It means so much to so many people around the world. But at the time, you've got no idea you're doing anything special. You're just doing your job. So at no point did Richard and I ever think we were anything other than a pair of dags organising dinners for our friends. And fundamentally, that's all it is. Nevertheless, with Richard's passing, it's been extraordinary just how many people have said, gosh, what you guys do is really lovely and really special. And you have no idea how new that is to me. That's something that I haven't known for the last 24 years. I've known it for the last month or two. And it's so lovely. But now that I do know it and feel it, then I really want it to continue. And I want it to continue in a way that is sustainable and ongoing long-term and keeps the silliness and the charm and the fun. And I've got a pretty clear idea of what I'd like it to look like moving forward.
Well, all I can say from the conversations I've had is all you two have managed to inculcate in the rest of us is a desire to support you with that. And so you've got plenty of offers to make whatever that is come to fruition. And I appreciate the candour with which you responded, because I can only imagine how challenging a time it's been for you.
Well, thank you so much. That's really lovely. And that's consistent entirely, Duncan, with your general loveliness and support of our group. But what I was thinking of is that we keep doing it once a year and maybe have an extra one outside of season. And we would, instead of having just the two of us, we would have a group of, say, 5 or 6 or 7, and organise it, sort of like a committee structure, and probably just be a little bit. I don't want to do anything formal. I hate that idea, and because I sit on, I don't know, about 5 boards at the moment, all of which have deductible gift recipient status, all of which are registered, 2 of which have very large budgets. It's a lot of work, and this group is the exact opposite of that. This is just a bunch of friends going out to dinner and one of them passing the hat around, literally. It's very unprofessional, very very lovely. And I'd like it to keep that flavour while at the same time having an organising committee. So, which will be you 2 plus about 5 other people.
Yeah.
Awesome. No, I was just wondering, is there? We've talked about a couple of the dinners. Is there a dinner or a moment at one of the dinners, or something that just brings some amazing memories, or something that you would like to just be able to share to some of the listeners? Because obviously we've got listeners who are, in Sweden, India, US, who have never come to one of these events or one of these nights. They've seen what the recordings that we've put up on there, but I was just wondering if there's a story that you wouldn't mind sharing, or.
Oh yeah, look, there's just so many that come to mind. That extraordinary dinner with my favourite rock star hero singing at a restaurant with me was pretty special. But also taking guests home is mind-blowing, or the guests that come are incredible. So when the internet first started in the mid-90s, there were chat rooms, or chat groups, I think they were called. Yeah. And so I was on one called the Saga List, which was for lovers of Silver Age and Golden Age comic books. And it turned out that one of the guys was using a secret identity, and he was really Dave Gibbons, who creator and artist of The Watchmen, and drew 2 issues of The Phantom beautifully. Anyway, he said he had a son who was doing medicine, and he shipped him out to see me, and he did a rotation with me for 3 months, and he was brilliant. He was such a great kid and a great student, and that was, 20 years ago. And so when he came out to Australia as a guest of Danny's, he came to our Phantom dinner and was a spectacular guest. He was just so generous. He drew a couple of pictures. In fact, he drew a picture of Rorschach and the Phantom, the comedian and the Phantom for me, which I treasure. But just walking up to him at Supernova and saying, "G'day, I'm Antonio," he just jumped out of the queue and gave me a hug, and that was an incredibly special moment. Meeting Jim Russell was utterly surreal. Lee Falk created and then produced the Phantom strip for 63 years, right? 1936 to 1999. Jim Russell did the same, about 62, 63 years for his strip, all around Australia and a lot of other countries as well. And he was in his late 80s, early 90s when we got him to come and give a talk. And he drew several lovely cartoons of the Phantom with his characters. And he was great. And I gave him a lift back home to his house in Cronulla and said, "Mate, you've had such an interesting life. What else have you been doing?" "Oh, this and that." This guy was the co-founder of the White City tennis courts. And he won the New South Wales Open. This This guy was a brilliant amateur golfer. This guy was, I think, godfather to one of the Packer children. He was a local travel agent in the Shire, and every year he organised the end of year overseas trip for my favourite footy team, St George. He just done everything. In addition to being this extraordinary writer and artist of a strip, so there was a lot of that joy about meeting people. Roger Fletcher, the guy who does Torcan and Staria still, what an extraordinary, undervalued Australian talent. Meeting James Kemsley was incredible. James Kemsley was the artist and writer of Ginger Meggs. And, Jimmy Banks created Ginger Meggs in 1922 or something, died at 62. Sold it to the next bloke, died at 62. James Kemsley was 61 when he gave a speech at the Phantom Dinner, and he made a joke about it. Next year he died at 62.
Wow.
Luckily, the strip was then purchased by a 25-year-old and an absolute genius who is one of our great exports, who's doing a wonderful job with it. So many incredible people that we met. Meeting Stan Goldberg, I mean, that was just ridiculously awesome. Stan Goldberg spent almost 65 years drawing Archie and Jughead and all those guys. And I said, Stan, you were there in the golden age. You were there at school in 1936, 37, 38 when Action Comics #1, New Fun #1, Marvel Comics #1 came out. Did you know any of those guys? Stan Lee and Jack Kirby? And he goes, well, Stan was in the year ahead of me at school, so I didn't know him that well, but he's a great guy. Off it went. Cy Barry, what an incredible, kind man. When Cy first came to our dinner, I think he's been 2 or 3 times. When the first time he came, Dietmar had borrowed a lot of money to do these magnificent prints, and the first one was a Cy print, and he brought 400 of them to this hotel room down at the Rocks, and it was a beautiful, exciting moment. And Cy and his delightful wife Simi, just such a beautiful couple. They were loving it because, like so many artists, there must have been at least 7 or 8 artists who've spoken at our dinner, and you think they haven't done a lot of public speaking before, and it's because they are the eccentric, strange guy who lives in the basement, draws the daily strip every day, and is unknown and uncelebrated until the 90s, when they might have started getting invited to comic conventions in the States and actually realising that there's tens of thousands of their fans out there. And, Dietmar handing Cy a whole bunch of prints, and then Simi signing them. Dietmar about to lose his mind, and Simi saying, well, I signed his birth certificate, his passport, I signed the electricity bills. I do the signing around here. His signature's terrible.
I did not know that. That's
awesome. It's gorgeous. And the two of them sounded like, and I say this with so much love and respect, Billy Crystal and Carol Ray from The Princess Bride, or even George Costanza's parents in Seinfeld. They are utterly lovely people. You often get disappointed when you meet your heroes, but not with Cy and Simi. They are just great.
Awesome.
second podcast in a row where we've had a Princess Bride reference.
Yeah. I think
Inconceivable.
I've
well,
the first mistake
it's not in when you buy the DVD, they've cut out the most important line. It's not in it anymore.
My name is Inigo Montoya. No?
No, that's still in it. That's very special. I've got actually one of those on my desk. You press the button and it tells you. Little bust of Inigo. No, the great line is the kidnapper saying Sicilians would rather kill their own children than part with money, and they're very fond of their children.
They took it out. Disappointing.
Wow, awesome. Okay, so what's next in your journey, in your Phantom journey? Are you still reading the comics every fortnight?
Yeah, pretty much. I try to read them every. If I can't read them, I make sure I know who wrote them and who drew the cover. Young Alex, who came to our dinner last time, what a talent! You know, I got very high hopes for him. I've restarted trying to finish off the Charlton and King series. It's been very, very slow. I'd like to do something for our local school. I'm on the board of our school here, and it's a wonderful privilege. And they're very indulgent of me donating comic books and perverting the minds of young people. And I think I'd like to do something more formal in terms of a library to have for them there. I'd like to actually organise my comics for the first time in 50 years and know where they were occasionally. And I'd really like to do something more creative than just buy and bag and board comics, although that's my primary love. I'd like to do something that maybe encourages people to read and write comics more. And so I've got a couple of ideas as to how that might work. I think, and obviously we'll talk about this, Jermayn and Duncan with Bradley and Joyful at the committee that you have been invited to and joined without having known about it yet. I think
this is news to me. Is it news to you?
Exactly right. But I think we should have a competition, and I think we should piggyback on with Frew and get Dudley to put it in the letters page. And do you remember there was a 50s issue or a series of 50s issues where there was this massively expensive prize? You know, it was a trip overseas or something, £1,000. I reckon we should have a competition to draw the Phantom and to draw a story and to write a story. And whoever wins it will fly them out to Sydney for a dinner with their parents or something like that. And,
oh, wow.
You know, why not do something like that?
Great idea.
So we'll try to make sure that whoever wins it lives in Sydney.
Well, there's all these entries from an R. White who claims to be 11.
The other thing I was thinking of is actually having a, and I don't want our costs to ever be to the extent where we miss out on our donations, but I reckon we could actually faff around with having a dinner at a different place, one that is maybe piggybacks with Supernova or with whatever the other one's called, and maybe have it in Melbourne just to try something different. I also think that it would be an amazing project to work with Frew to do something that collects the Lee Falk stories, because they've been done in an ad hoc fashion by the publishers, and some of them are wonderful, but they're incredibly costly, and it puts them out of reach of the normal punter. So I haven't given that much thought, but I'd like every person who loves the Phantom to be able to afford to have something spectacular on their bookshelf.
Mm.
I've actually been experimenting with binding and with getting slipcases and those sorts of things done, which, I have no commercial interest in that. Whatever I find that works, I'll just hand over to the guys at Frew and see if they're interested.
Mm.
Wow.
So it sounds like you're buying Frew as well.
Well, I reckon about 10 years ago you could have bought it pretty cheap. But the people who've taken it over, they're really smart and they love the Phantom and they're doing a great job. So I don't think it's no longer affordable.
Well said. Antonio, while we're discussing options for your future, your professional and community work, and through that, you've proven you're a philanthropist with a great giant brain and a huge heart. And something anyone who's attended the LFMBEC events or has ever met you will confirm. Now, Dr. Axel, who runs the Jungle Hospital, was getting on in the 40s when he was first created, and he's maybe considering retirement sometime soon. Would you ever spend some time in the Bangalla jungle treating those in need? I can't confirm whether there's bulk billing available, but you are under the Phantom's protection. Would there be any interest?
Look, I actually have a pith helmet and a pair of khaki shorts. Unfortunately, that's about the limit of the skills.
I'm putting you down for a solid maybe.
Well, in the 22nd Phantom story, the series that has just been published by Frew, Dr. Axel actually passes away. So there is an opening.
Look, I'd love to be Dr. Axel, but I think there was a story where there was, I think it might have even been the first appearance of Trader Joe, where he was both a retailer who was a member of his local community and sort of vaguely corrupt. And I reckon that's probably where I'm looking to apply my skill set.
I'm sure I was going to say I'm sure the registry board for the doctors in Canberra isn't paying attention, but that's you.
Yeah, not a problem.
Nothing like marking your own homework.
Duncan, any other questions you want to ask?
Nothing else. Antonio, your auction prowess is one of my favourite parts of the dinner. And for those that have gone, when the bidding slows down and Antonio is not satisfied with the money that's coming out of people's pockets and going to the Children's Hospital, he starts to tell boring stories to get us to surrender and just throw money at him. Fortunately, I've been able to keep my wallet in my pocket tonight because nothing that has come out of your mouth this evening, Doctor, has been boring. This is a fantastic conversation that we've had with you that I'll treasure for a long time.
Oh, that's so lovely. Thank you so much. And it's a lot kinder than what I'm used to. Duncan, I had this hilarious moment at the annual general meeting of our state Australian Medical Association, where I retired from the presidency a couple of years ago and handed it over to one of my best mates, who he and I failed anatomy together in first year 40 years ago. He's really smart and a professor, but we were still duds a long time ago. And anyway, the health minister came along and she's lovely. And she got up and she said, "This is a man who cannot tell a story in any way that would be described as concise." And that's coming from your mates.
Yeah, that's fairly true. Look, honestly, thank you for joining us. I hope the fans, I hope you have enjoyed that. While Antonio may not be an artist or a writer or even a publisher, we felt his impact to the Phantom and his with Richard, of course, and the influence is large enough to warrant a chat with. So we appreciate that. Now, if you want to learn more about the dinners, past and future, visit the website, lfmbec.org. Again, thanks must go to the Patreons because the Patreons are actually the ones that support the funding of the website. with your donations, it means even more can be donated to the Children's Hospital because we're not spending money on things like the website. So again, you can find out more about us on our website, which is chroniclechamber.com. And you can email us at chroniclechamber@gmail.com, where you can send us your thoughts, feedback and opinions. And you can also do that on social media platforms or over at the YouTube channel. You can subscribe to us via YouTube or through your favourite podcast apps, including iTunes or Spotify. Again, thank you. And from myself, happy phantoming.
Phantom.
Thanks, guys.